1:03. If you guys want, we can give one more minute and then we'll get started. And what's not on the agenda, I guess at the top, Melvette, if we can just insert a bullet for intros. I don't know if I can do it. I may be able to do it. I just don't want to mess with it though. Okay, so it is, I think, 1:03 at this point. If I'm correct? We want to welcome everybody. I want to be sensitive and respectful of people's time. And if others join us, great. We'll welcome them into the conversation. But I'm so excited that we are continuing this conversation around the Census 2020, work through a racial equity lens. And so I welcome everyone back to the table. And if we could just do introductions, particularly if there's anyone who's joined us by phone. And so I'm going to start with those that we can't see right away. And so Sharice and Carolyn, if you would introduce yourselves first and share what organization you're from and what part of the country you're in. And if there's been any census work you've been doing on the ground in your community. Sharice, are you still there?
I'm still here. I was being polite, allowing Carolyn to go first. So this is Sharice. I am in Washington State. I kind of, in this realm, represent two organizations, One America and also WASA Parent Ambassadors. As of work that I've been doing is One America is getting information out. And then as a WASA, like I'm kind of not as involved as I would like to be. But I would love to find a way to marry the two, right? Because I feel like as long as we're both advocating together, like, you know, the message is getting across a broader scale. So.
Okay. Welcome, Sharice. Carolyn?
Hi, this is Carolyn Solitaire from Washington State. I'm not even sure who I'm affiliated with. It's a lot of everybody, all these different organizations, but I know we have the Washington State Parent Ambassadors, and then there's Children's Alliance, and then Sharice is my go-to friend. But just getting the message out, you know, about people being careful, watching what they do, you know, and just, you know, well, what can I say? Just advocating for people, you know, and letting them know that, you know, they have to watch their step, because where I live, we have so many different cultures here that you don't know who you can trust here. But just, you know, everyone to be mindful of what's going on. And it's like Sharice says, how can we marry the companies together, which would be awesome to find that one out. So thank you.
Great. So let's go to Midwest. I mean, is there anyone else who's on phone or on Zoom, but there's no video, so I can't see you? Then Rachel, let's go to you.
Yeah, this is Rachel Brink from the United Parent Leaders Action Network, UPLAN, and I'm based in Chicago, Illinois. And we are in the 4th week of UPLAN's Census and Citizenship Question campaign. We just had a super productive meeting with our Immigration Policy Committee on Monday. And the parents wanted to set a goal for the campaign for each of our, well, collectively as UPLAN, for us to engage with at least 1,500 parent leaders, which when you break that down between all of our member groups, that's about 50 parents per organization. It's a pretty big goal, but it's good to have high expectations and to see how motivated parents are to engage on the census and on citizenship questions. So
Yeah.
And
that is
Rachel,
all.
this engagement of 50 per organization, is there a timeline for it? Because I know we're waiting for some things to happen, and we'll be talking about that a little later, but is there a time frame?
Yeah, there's really no specific timeline. We'll talk more about this on our governing council call with the parent governing council members tomorrow, but it's really in the next month, I would say, just like really before the Supreme Court case happens, and then afterward, just as follow-up and kind of like a continued information sharing once the case either has a ruling or whatnot. So yeah, and these interactions and engagement, parents were giving examples of, it could be through a one-on-one, it could be through coming on the webinar, it could be through various different sources. So just based on the organization's capacity.
Great. Thank you. Patty, you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Patty Keckison. I'm the co-director of the National Parent Leadership Institute, along with Donna Thompson-Bennett. I reside in Danbury, Connecticut, where I'm webbing in from today, where it's really bright but really cold outside. I'm happy to be here with all of you.
Melvette?
Hi, good afternoon. I'm Melvette Hill. I'm with the NPLI as communications consultant, but I'm also the state coordinator for PLTI in Connecticut, and I too am in sunny Danbury, Connecticut. That is cold. Good to be here.
And Donna Thompson-Bennett, also in Connecticut, but in another area in Bridgeport. So none of us in Connecticut are in the same space together. And one of the things that we've been doing that you're going to hear about is in collaboration with UPlan is the webinar. And we're going to have Melvette and Rachel speak to that in a moment. And then the other piece is we've been sharing and promoting the Spanish webinar that's coming up on the Census 2020 in the citizenship question. And also the materials, and we've shared with different parent leaders that UPlan has created, and we let them make the decision of what they want to do in terms of doing some more advocacy around the work. But I'm grateful to all of you. I would also say that there was a snafu where I thought I had sent the Zoom link yesterday and learned late in this morning that it hadn't gone out and attached. And so if you guys have text or emails of other people who normally would be on this call, feel free to reach out to them and share, tell them to check their inbox, because it should be there now where they have it, because I know that there were other people who had accepted. In fact, I'm seeing something for Rose. She's asking to resend the information. Something's happening. The information isn't working. So I'm going to let you, Melvette and Rachel, if you could begin doing the 311 webinar follow-up, kind of give an update of what occurred and what are some of the next things that are occurring as a result of that.
Okay, great. Rachel, do you mind if I start, and then I'll let you segue into the other stuff? Okay. So we hosted a webinar on March 11th titled Census 2020, the Citizenship Question. And on that webinar, I'm not sure if you were able to attend, but we did build a little bit of historical context to provide a little bit of history for those who weren't aware of how censuses got started and why we have census here in the United States. And then we led into why the citizenship question is important for people to understand and to advocate against it being there for those who were advocating against it. So I think we had a good participation, a lot of good questions came up. We also have these resources that came out of the webinar available. And I believe that some of you might have it. I'm not sure. Can you see on my screen a Google Drive or no?
Yes, I can.
So here are some items that are in the Google Drive that you all have access to as persons who participated in the Racial Equity Think Tank. We have the citizenship question resources, which came out as an email to the team and others and partners and everyone who participated on the webinar. And then we have the slides that are available with the annotation. So those are the notes actually as we were speaking to the slides, so you'll be able to see what we were saying. And then we also included one of the resources that UPlan provided, and that's that census half page with a call script. That's also linked in the presentation as well. And these are just the notes I'm taking today. So here's what that email looked like. And we have a webinar recording, so you can listen and watch. Again, here are some questions that are planned for the 2020 census. So just in case you're interested in what kinds of questions are going to be there, you can click on that link. And then, of course, we wanted to link to the U.S. Census Bureau website. And then there's a particular page that deals with this 2020 census. So there's a lot of information there. I would say it's very robust and sometimes overwhelming when you're looking at that information, the content. So we provided it there for you so you can explore it on your own. I thought that the search features are really great. So if there's a question that you have or a topic that you're interested in as it relates to the census, it's easy to find it there. And then because we thought it was so important to offer this in Spanish, UPlan is partnering with us to host that this week. So Rachel can talk a little bit about that. And
yeah. So the UPlan Immigration Policy Committee wanted to host this in Spanish as well with MPLI, and so we have Maricela Carmona from Abriendo Puertas, who is also at the Race Equity Think Tank in Rochester. She'll be facilitating and sharing a little bit, along with Leo Callejas from NPLI, PLTI in California. And then we also have a special guest from NALEO, which is the National Association of Latino Elected and Appointed Officials. And this was mainly because after the English webinar, we debriefed with some of our parents who were on the call, and some of them felt like there was so much information packed into such a short amount of time that just having a little less information would be helpful with more time to process. And we, as UPlan, have learned that when we have Spanish-speaking spaces to digest information, it's often really helpful to have more time for questions and answers, and to have someone on who can't give legal advice but has more of a policy background, since UPlan, we are not policy experts. So we invited this woman from NALEO. Her name is Lizette, and she will help speak to some concerns and some individual questions that our Spanish-speaking parents may have. It is this Friday, March 29 at 9 a.m. Pacific, and there is the flyer posted on the screen. But yeah, 9 a.m. Pacific and noon Eastern time. And so we hope to have a great discussion, and Abriendo Puertas is actually live streaming the webinar for a group of facilitators in New Mexico, in Albuquerque. And so there should be about 25 to 30 parents live streaming it, since a lot of parents don't have internet access at their homes. And so we are very excited for that to happen as well.
Before we ask any more questions about this, I saw Jacob Dixon out of Choice for All. Jacob, want to give you a chance to say hello and to reintroduce yourself to the group, and to share where you're calling from.
Yes. Oh, hi, everybody. Jacob Dixon here from Choice for All and Family Leadership Network. I am calling today from our office on Long Island, and we are in the process of moving into our new building in the next few months. So things are kind of a little hectic. So I'm sorry I haven't been on the calls there, but I have been caught up with your feedback and all of your notes, which I greatly appreciate because it at least keeps me on my toes of where I need to go with our work here with you guys. So there goes that.
Great, thank you. And it's good to hear you and to see you.
Likewise.
And it's also great to see that great building you're going to be moving into.
Yes.
Yeah, that has to be a really good feeling. I remember when we were all at the U-Plan gathering in Albuquerque, where you guys got the first, bit of news that the building was happening, and then here it is,
Here it is.
Times later,
it
actually exists.
Yes, it does.
So,
good to see y'all.
All right. So, Rachel. Hi, who else is here?
Yeah, this is Adrian Pedrosa with Abriendo Puertas. So it's good to be on the call, and very excited to be a partner with U-Plan on this webinar and the amazing work that our parent leaders are doing. So thanks for the opportunity.
Oh, we're so glad, and glad you're able to join us, that Abriendo Puertas is partnering because you guys were part of the racial equity piece, and so it just makes perfect sense, and thank you for that live streaming that will occur. I wanted to ask you, Rachel, besides those group of parents, do you have any sense of the numbers of people who might have registered? Because we have been trying to promote it, and we would encourage everyone on this call, if you haven't shared the Spanish webinar that's coming up on this Friday, please, send out the flyer in your network. But do you have a sense of others who might have registered besides those who'll be live streaming?
Yeah, right now I think there's about 12 parents who registered online, and it's a pretty good mix of U-Plan parents and MPLI, PLTI alum, and then there's some that I don't know their affiliation, but we will hopefully find out. So,
Melda, I just want to keep up in terms of your notes that you had Jacob from Choice for All, and you had Adrian from Abriendo Puertos.
Can you spell his name from Abriendo Puertos? I'm sorry, I didn't hear you that well.
It's Adrian, and last name Pedroza.
Got it. I'll get the rest.
And is there anyone else who's on the phone that we can't see or is on Zoom, but you're not on video? I want to welcome anybody. I hope we didn't miss anyone.
This is Rosalia with Kofi Power Pack, Illinois.
Hello, beautiful. How are you?
Hey.
So what we were asking also as people join, if there's anything on the ground you guys have been doing besides this shared work with us in terms of the webinar that we just had in English and the one that's coming up in Spanish, if there's any movement on the ground with you and other parent leaders in your communities that you want us to know about in terms of Census 2020, feel free to share that before we move on to the next piece.
So I could speak really quickly from us in New York. And so we, a lot of our families that we connect with and our parents are actually in hard to count communities. And so there is a big push now within our county government to actually create more of a cohesive effort with community-based organizations to push more of awareness and getting it out there. The thing that we are advocating for based upon the work that we talked about nationally with the Racial Equity Think Tank was bringing more parents in as the trusted messengers and actually employing them to help do the counting and be a part of the process of the census. And so I think that's something that's important as part of our conversations nationally, not just education, but how do we actually get them out in the field to be the messengers? It's really important because I feel like that's the way that we're going to break down some of those walls, particularly in those communities that often, in our own home here in Roosevelt, we have folks that come all time unsolicited for solar panels. So why would I want to open up a door to go ahead with a census? And so we're trying to break down those barriers. And I think that's an important part of the conversation that we are trying to push for here throughout New York and Long Island specifically. And hopefully we could be able to bring that type of discussion nationally as we start going into beyond just the awareness phase, but actually implementation.
Excellent. Thank you, Jacob. And definitely we would want to be kept abreast of that, because I remember when we were even all together in Rochester, we talked about a campaign of how do we inform parents, leaders in this, as, you know, with all the different, you know, issues, including the next one we're going to talk about. And how do you get people to move, in a sense, beyond the fear that might be associated with, you know, responding to the census. So definitely keep us in the loop about how that's working and where there might be opportunity for others to replicate or mirror what you guys are doing.
Sure, and I'll definitely bring that up. And if we need to host another webinar with you plan or other folks to get that out there, we're more than willing to do that, so that way we can get that word out and, you know, share best practices across the board. So I'll make that commitment.
Excellent, thank you.
Okay,
And
This is Rose.
Go ahead, Rose. Mm-hmm.
I'm really excited to dive into this call, and I'm going to have to get off in a minute because our city treasurer initiative starts in about an hour. But from the wonderful sheet that Rachel drafted, which pointed out some of the important reasons why folks should do the census, I've still found in some of our most challenged communities, fear supersedes that. People are so afraid of losing vital services or giving information that will become ammunition for the government. Even with that wonderful sheet that shows all of the benefit that comes from doing the census, I need some pointers on how we flip the script on this and really get people out of that fear mindset around this. So I'm excited to dive into this.
Yeah. And is there any, and I agree with you, Rose, is there anyone who's on the call who even has some initial responses to that? You know, how are we, what's the best way to address that fear that is very real for people? And we also understand what it's grounded in.
I can speak quickly on that. Rose, hi, it's good to hear from you as well. Jacob here from Choice for All again. So one of the things that we actually did was, in addition to the one pager sheet that you plan did, we actually created what are the types of programs that are actually in the community that are connected through the census, for them to understand what this large national thing, how it does it impact their particular neighborhood. And so, for example, you know, community development block grant funds and how that supports a lot of our after school programs here. And then actually list all the organizations and say, hey, because we were undercounted, we were cut over 50% of our funding. Now imagine if we got more money from this to get more kids inside these spaces. And so that's where the relatability came in. Folks, because often with that fear of not just giving information, it's also not knowing specifically how does this connect to me besides the government just wanting my information. And so that was one way that we broke down a little bit more of this larger picture by trying to make it as applicable to the person themselves the best way we can and make it a little bit more relatable. And I could definitely share that aspect with you, and also some of the tough conversations that we had and some pointers about how we address that as well. So those are two things that I could share off with you offline, and then the whole group as well.
Okay, great.
Okay, thank you so much. And these new proposed cuts have really just heightened that. And so, you know, even as we were talking about the SNAP benefits and all those things that people in really challenged communities relate to, you know, but then you turn around and see that, you know, he's causing the belief that he has the power now to even take that away from the states. And so it's just rough.
Right.
Thank you both. So Rachel, one of the other concerns and one of the things that's contributing to fear is the proposed citizenship question that the campaign is advocating to have removed. Can you give us an update on what you have heard recently? We know that it's going before the Supreme Court, and it's interesting. Melvette, where were you when you saw NBC? And so we all tuned in, and they were having a discussion around this, you know, proposed question and how it came to be and how it did. And the way they were reporting, it just seemed odd, and that the original motivation for it didn't ring true. So turn it over to you, Rachel. What's happening there?
Yeah. Well, so yeah, the Supreme Court is supposed to hear the case on April 23, but they're only hearing the case that came from Judge Furman in New York.
Okay.
And since then, there has been one other ruling that has happened in California, and that judge ruled in favor of removing the question as well, with a couple other points that have much more evidence that could be supported and much that could do better in front of the Supreme Court than the New York case could. So advocates are happy that 2 federal district judges have ruled in opposition, but they are a little bummed that the Supreme Court decided to take it up so quickly without waiting for the other 2 cases to finalize. So we're still waiting on the last case in Maryland, and we don't really know when the judge will rule in that case, but right now, yeah, the Supreme Court is going to hear the case on the 23rd, and after that, who knows how long it will take for the Supreme Court to make a ruling. I've heard that there are advocates, or that there are a lot of resolutions going through communities and counties and school districts where it's kind of just like for show, but parents are signing on to these resolutions and school boards and city councils are passing them to get the attention of the senators and Congress people to see that people don't want this question to be on the 2020 census. So we're seeing a lot of on the ground advocacy still and some movement, but it's really tough to get anything through Congress since we don't, or Democrats do not rule in the Senate. So for now, it's still kind of up in the air, but Congress can take action, and so that's what we're still trying to advocate for before the Supreme Court hears the case.
And so part of getting people to call representatives and send messages is in line with that date of doing it before April 23rd, correct?
Yeah.
Okay.
And I mean, even after April 23, since we don't know when the Supreme Court will actually make their ruling, there's some case to be made that you can still call on Congress after the April 23 mark. But yeah, the big push is from now until the Supreme Court hears the case, just to say, we don't have to live in this fear and uncertainty. Congress can take action right now, and they have a responsibility to protect an accurate and fair count.
So if we can almost think about beyond this critical question, we had just said that we wanted to be able to have this campaign moving forward through the lens of racial equity, that we needed to begin, building a shared strategy. And so we first started with informing around the citizenship question, around the census overall, the historical context. We've done this webinar, and we'll be doing the Spanish one on Friday. So what's next? What do we think needs to happen based on what we know? The webinars won't necessarily fully remove the fear. There's still the pending question that's there. What do you think we can do from our local areas, but as a part of a shared national work, to keep moving this campaign around the census forward? What would be a next step strategy? And the floor is open.
So it's Jacob again from Choice for All. Just a quick question that will help me formulate my response. So right now, I know as it stands, we've done the awareness with webinars. Has the local who are on this call or those who are involved in the think tank actually hosted like info sessions or anything related to the US Census? Because if so, maybe that might be a next step that we should consider, is that, we've got our awareness as a national network, but how has this actually reached to parents, I would love to hear insight on that, because that's something that we're trying to actually host here in our hard to reach communities, that which primarily our parents come from in our network. And so any thoughts on that, or ways at which people are doing it, or if they're not, is that something that we could have shared strategy on, how to plan an effective info session on this? I figured I might bring some opportunities from there.
Excellent. Sharice, are you still on the line? Because I think you were speaking to doing this.
Yeah, I'm still here. So I'm on the Community Governing Council or whatever with One America. And we have our next meeting come Thursday. So that's what I was going to bring to the table on how we could do that. But if I could possibly get the information that the other guy was sharing about how you have those conversations on why this is important, because when I have private conversations, it's still that fear, and especially with the uncertainty, and then like we overcome one hurdle and then he throws another hurdle in it. Even though people trust me, they don't trust him. So,
Right. Wow. Okay.
I think that in and of itself, that's a huge strategy.
Yeah. To have local
work, and work is, and talking about overcoming that fear. I think we need to have just a conversation about that around the context of the census, because that can at least us have kind of a unified front of what we're going to do to talk about that. I think that's very important, and that was a huge point brought up.
So inviting all of our partners to actually have the conversations as a strategy around not only the census information and what people need to know and why it's important, but having some type of facilitated dialogue around the fear.
Yes.
All right.
Because I feel like there's two. Yes, because I feel like it's two things that we're battling, right? Like, yes, they feel comfortable with me, but they don't feel comfortable with all the other. So how do I even get them to talk about the other, the census, when the fear is the giant elephant within the room?
Right.
Melbette, can you, are you remembering, I thought Rochester, but I don't know if they've hosted their meeting yet around this. Rochester PLTI, are you recalling, you or Patty, that they were trying to do a session?
I don't think they hosted it yet. I don't think they hosted it. I think these are good ideas. I think in some of the upcoming webinars, the next one after the Spanish language one, I think we're hosting probably in May, early May, is on and I think in that there was the idea to build in the, I'm sorry, I'm hearing what Rose is saying is very heavy to me, right? The overcoming the fear. And we've started to have this conversation. I know Rachel and I intentionally included that, and definitely Rachel in the materials, and we spoke about it on the last webinar. There was someone who spoke eloquently on the last webinar about people having to make that decision and choice, right? And it's a risk, right? So it's really identifying and owning and naming that risk, and coming to terms with, does the gain outweigh the risk, right? And so I think as we continue, so I think this is a thread that we continue to pull through the webinars and each interaction that we have inside and outside of our group, to be clear about the risk and the fear, but what's at stake. And I think what's at stake is so much bigger. What's to gain is so much bigger. And so, part of what we're going to talk about is, people being undercounted, right? Those communities are undercounted, to Jacob's point. Also, children are undercounted. And then the other piece, the next webinar after that was going to be actually how to, so I'm wondering, like, does that come first? How to engage locally, right? So there are fair count committees that we were going to talk about. There are also census jobs,
Right.
you know, so why not be that trusted person and get paid to do it? We're about upward mobility, right, and pathways to leadership too, in our community. So I'm just rethinking. I'm wondering if that comes first before it's hard, right? But I think we have to be intentional in our messaging and continue to hear what Rose is saying, what others have said, and see how we weave that through, right? It's always going to be that question in the back of people's heads. But the gain is so much greater, right? And what we have to lose is so much greater if we aren't counted. And we know the people who are always undercounted. And that's why we need the counts to be right, to get the monies for those communities, for those services, for those programs. So
and can I say, so can I say that was the point I made on the last call that we had, and I'm wondering if there's some kind of list or even things that people could share are just a couple of here's what they can't do. I think if you could eliminate the fear by giving people some hope of the things that they think are going to be taken that is not necessarily a reality, I feel like that would be very helpful to me. And even to some of the stuff you just said, if you could send those tidbits of information to me, because I think with then saying, here's why you need to do it, there are no safeguards for folks, nothing to latch on to that gives them either a realm of hope or some sense of protection. And so I'm wondering if that should be one of the main factors going forward that I use to really build on that. Here's why it's so imperative that you have to do that, but here are also some protections for you.
It's interesting, Rachel and Melvette and Jacob, even based on what you were sharing, and anyone else who might know, I think part of the challenge, Rose, is that people were asking, even in some of our earlier conversations, about those safeguards. And because of the current climate, people have been hesitant to say what can't happen, because it's almost like there's this thing of, we don't know. We'd like to be able to say that technically it's not supposed to go here. Your information is only supposed to be, in this collection process to the organization who's receiving it. But we almost were hesitant because we felt like we can't guarantee, and we don't want to give a false sense of assurance in our advocacy. And so, Rachel or Melvette, I don't know if you have found anything else in your most recent research when you were preparing even for this webinar that could be a safeguard piece that Rose is asking for. But I just remember us saying, well, we can't guarantee and certain things. So I'll stop there.
I know on our last webinar, we talked about that a little bit of, the 76-year rule, what the government could and could not share and to whom. But again, right, that's technically what the government should and should not do. I personally can't guarantee that that's not going to happen. I mean, quite frankly, we see these things play out with ICE all the time.
All the time.
Right. And so I'm hesitant to even offer, right? I can say this is what's supposed to happen. Is that in reality what is going to happen? I think the other piece too is looking at context. So I would be less likely to advocate for ICE based on what I have seen and heard personally, right, in my community and what they're supposed to do or not supposed to do, or what local officials should be doing or not. When it comes to the census, I think maybe we try, I don't have that information now, but we try to build out this thing to combat the fear. What has happened? So are there instances where people have given out information and then lost services, or were affected negatively? I haven't necessarily heard of those instances. So I think it's about finding the proof that actually happened before, if it did happen, right? And us owning that. So we know instances where this happened. If it hasn't happened, again, it doesn't mean that it might not happen, but it is less likely to happen in probability, right? So So logically speaking, we could build that context.
I think
Rachel,
that, sorry.
so Rachel, you were going to say something, and then Jacob.
Yeah, so I think on the overall gaining and losing services side of things, UPlan hasn't really heard of anything either. But on the citizenship and uncertain of immigration status side of things, like some of our parents know about back in the 1970s or 80s, 70s when the Census Bureau shared information about all of the Japanese residents in America, and then they all went to internment camps. And that's illegal for them to share that information, but it still happened. So we have heard from one of our PK parent leaders in California that who's super engaged. She is doing a video with a different organization, and I'm not sure of her status, but she lives in a mixed status family, and she's speaking out on this video about why it's important for her to fill out this, or why she's going to do the census and what the risks are for her, but why she finds it so important. And when other parents on the Immigration Policy Committee heard that, they were like, that's what we need to share. We need to share parent stories of what it means to parents in their community, what's at stake, what are the risks, without putting UPlan or our actual organizations at risk of giving people inaccurate information or information we just can't verify. So, yeah, that's our 2 cents.
Was PK willing to share that story, like for others to use, or they were just using it internally?
Yeah, so it's Lilia. I'm not sure if you've met her. She was at the Albuquerque Gathering, and she is doing it for I'm not sure the organization she's making this video through, but she said once it's done, she'll share it with UPlan, and we will definitely share it with you guys as well.
And wondering, are there others who might, and Jacob, I'm coming back to you, have parent leaders who might be willing to also do that story? Because I hear you, Rachel, saying that and Melvette, you said the same thing. There's certain guarantees we can't make, and we don't want to do that. But if you have the gain and risk story coming directly from parent leaders and those who, really are engaged with the gain as well as the risk part of it, sharing their story, do we know if there are others who might be, or is that something we should ask within our organizations, if there are parent leaders who might be willing to tell their story, either video or by audio?
I think we should ask.
Okay.
I know the stories are there. They might be willing to share them anonymously, but keep in mind, we're talking about the fear that over time has been established in communities based on the fact that as soon as they shared this piece of information with one entity, it put them at risk with another entity, and they lost services or funding or the very things that they needed to survive. That's the proof. The proof is in these human beings that are being predicated on, and these things are impacting their lives in a negative way. If this would be easy, if they didn't have the fear and would come forward and share it, we wouldn't be in this situation.
Right. Yeah. Oh, okay. So Jacob, you were going to say something else.
Yes, I am actually wanted to just quickly add, I think just based off the thread of the conversation thus far, I think we need to figure out where our point of advocacy is going towards. And because, for example, if I'm an advocate for students with disabilities, IDA, as we know it, are changing consistently across the board. But as an advocate for parents who sit in those CSE and those IEP meetings, I have to go based upon the current statute that I am aware of to ensure the case. Am I held liable? Yes. But at the end of the day, I think that it's important to Rose's point about the safeguards is that if it's not us as UPlan per se, does that also give us an opportunity to extend to experts that are outside of UPlan, such as attorneys, other civic groups that are talking about what these safeguards are, so that we can at least say, hey, according to some of our partners in this work or folks that are here, we know this may not be the be all end all answer, but at least it gives some context of legal groups, organizations, people who have this focus to be able to kind of take that risk and saying it where we're inviting them into our space for the conversation. So at least some of those issues can be resolved and or at least approached, because as Rose said, this is a long-term issue that has been played in our communities for a long period of time. And to create that systematic change overnight is not necessarily going to be, but if we're able to, in small steps, figure out groups, partners, or things like you guys have done with the webinars in the past to help at least bring some of those conversations or fact sheets or things about that. I think there are a lot more folks out there that might have some of those responses for us that we may know right now that can help us lead in that part.
Okay. Was someone else going to say something before I take our attention back to the list we've created so far and start putting names to some of these in terms of, let's see some work around before we gather again to actually start moving some of these strategies forward? Anyone wanting to add anything before we look at the list we've generated? And I thank everybody who's participating, even if you're participating by being a great listener. Okay, so everyone who is on the screen can see the list, but for those of you who are calling in by phone, I'm going to read the list of our strategy discussion. And what I would ask everyone to think about, is there a place that you would like to be engaged to start doing some follow-up work on the particular strategy? The other thing I want you to do is say, maybe we can't do all of this, or maybe we shouldn't try to do all of this right now, but is there one or two of these strategies that you think should be our next 2 steps, right? So the first bullet, and it's in no particular order, just in the way that it was generated. We know we've already started with informing on history of census and sharing on the citizenship question and how to take action. I think we want to continue with that strategy, is the reason for that bullet. We want to continue doing that. There was also the thought of hosting local in-person information sessions. And so we learned that Sharice, as a part of the Community Governing Council with One America, is actually doing this at a meeting that's coming up. But Jacob's recommendation is that maybe all of us consider through our organizations hosting local in-person information sessions. We also thought, based on, as we do these, if we decide to do these information sessions, that we need to develop a strategy, including talking points on how to have a facilitated dialogue around overcoming the fear of taking the census and the perceived consequences. Also, that we're looking to figure out, how do we share protections for people, the law, the protocol, examples of when we saw the census share data illegally versus current probability. What are the instances? But I want to connect that to the final thing that Jacob just shared. We might need to determine, what is the point of advocacy? Is there a way to address some of these protections by engaging other experts from different organizations who can speak on behalf of those issues? And then another strategy, are there instances, I think they go together, when people lost services based on the information they shared on the census? And Rachel already kind of answered that, and saying that it not only did they lose service, they lost freedom. And one of the most documented eras of our time in terms of the Japanese internment camps that took place during the war. We also talked about a strategy of asking parent leaders, modeling after Lilia sharing for PK, to share their stories, where we would, of course, seek where they were open to, if they wanted to be identified, fine, but in instances to give them the safeguard of even the process where their identity could be hidden as they shared the stories. So when we look at this in the next 5 minutes, are there 2 of these that we think should be the priority steps that we need to start building out as a strategy to share with other members of our team, and to put like some real meat on the bones of this? It just went away, Melvet. Okay. All right, it's back. Any strategy rising to the top of where you think we should start?
For me, I think it's the strategy and the talking points of the overcoming of the fear and the consequences. I think that what Melvette spoke about of how it interweaves into all of the sessions in the webinars. I think that if we are able to talk about that at least at the beginning part of the conversations, I think creates a lot more relatability to the folks who we're connecting with before we start diving into like the facts and information. So I think that's an important piece that should be considered.
Okay. Anyone else?
This is Adrián.
Go ahead.
We believe in the local strategies, and we'll continue to work with our local implementing partners to see where there's a desire to really look at local actions, such as what's happening here in New Mexico with the live stream and the gathering of parents and some of that on the ground work. But there's a strong partner with the Partnership for Community Action that does very strong on the ground organizing and advocacy work. So we'll continue to look for other partners nationally that could really make this work come to life and be relevant at the local community level. So we ensure that the local resources are there to support families through the fear issue and to support the on the ground work.
Would you be able to share some of the information that you guys are using there that other communities and other organizations that are represented here, and some who aren't on the call but who are part of this work?
Yeah, I think with the work that Maricela and Evan Deportes is doing with UPlan, they could check in with the local Partnership for Community Action to see how they can share some of that work that's happening in New Mexico. Certainly, and that's I don't believe I got on a little bit late, but I don't believe Maricela's on the line, but she is an amazing leader that can really provide her perspective and that input based on what's her experiences with the work in New Mexico.
Okay, great. And so Melvette, what I'm thinking too, based on what Jacob also shared at some point about the local work that they were doing, and Teresa shared, now if we could actually do a follow-up and asking all of our different partner organizations to give us examples of different local strategies they're using to inform, in person or live streaming, as Abuendo's about to do, and to encourage others, to, if they don't have a local strategy, to begin to think about what they might do and to use the examples that we know of. And we'll also check in with, I know Rochester PLTI had something, in the works, and we can maybe include that as well. And then in terms of developing the strategy and talking points, I would also think we could invite, because Jacob, it sounds like you guys have already started some of this work, but again, inviting others to maybe weigh in on, a shared, racial equity, think tank strategy. Maybe it's another one-pager or something that can go along with the UPlan one-pager that comes, from us, that addresses some of those things that Rose said. Even though the one-pager was great, there's still this piece of people not still being concerned about the fear and not being able to move beyond that. So we might not have all the answers, but any things that we think can help to address some of those fears that you outlined, Melvette, maybe we can help create that. And if we could start the draft and then get others to weigh in, that would be great. So I see local piece and the developing strategy and talking points. Those are two. Is there anything else? I thought I heard another voice trying to get into the conversation. It was a female voice, so I don't want to lose it.
Okay, this was Carolyn from Washington. And, I was just thinking that, excuse me one second. I was just thinking that I know that some people who know me and another friend of mine, if, in our area, if we can come together and meet with people where they know us, or know a little bit about us, they could feel more familiar with the information that we need to bring to them about the census.
Okay.
I just had that thought, and I thought, well, I can take it to the places that I go, but I have to have someone else help me with the information.
Okay.
I just wanted to throw that out there.
Yes.
It was just
All
a
right.
thought.
And I think that was something even that Jacob and I also heard Sharice was saying earlier in this conversation, how important that is. And it's almost like, how do we partner with certain experts or people who have the facts, but help to build the trust relationship, because you might have the relationship and people trust and want to hear from you, but there's certain information that you would want someone who is more of an expert to share on. But getting the people who are receiving and hearing the information to be open to receiving it from them. It's like, how do we, I think that's part of our strategic thinking, but I think it might come just with ongoing conversation and having those people consistently show up with you. That will make the difference. So I'm mindful of time. We have a couple minutes, and I just want to make sure if we offer this back to the larger group, these two focal points that incorporate some of the other things. And I love what you're doing, Melvette. She's like pulling things together under the different categories. And so I'm seeing 3 different strategies. And if everyone could take a look at that and see if this is okay for us to begin our next step process. And what we will do is send out follow-up as well as invitation for members of this group to say, yes, and I want to be a part of helping to develop this particular, strategy and sharing back with the group. Is that okay with everyone?
Yes.
So technically there are 4. There's the continuation of the advocacy around the citizenship question, and we had said we'd agree to that. And then these 3 new things that we talked about today based on all of your input. So for those who are on the phone, I'm going to highlight them. Continue advocacy on the citizenship question. Host local in-person information sessions. Develop strategy and talking points and/or facilitated dialogue on overcoming fear of taking the census and perceived consequences. And then the 4th one is partner with experts to share protections for people in terms of law and protocol. Any questions about those?
The only thing I would add is just Jacob again from New York, is that on the developed strategy part of it, with the 1-pager, I think it's important that we build off of what UPlan had started already with Rachel and Erin. I think that we need to add more pieces to it, so that way it just shows continuity of all of us as partners on it, because sometimes having different resources may create a lot more confusion as to the information, whereas things are more centralized in one place. We could pull off pieces as partners. So I think that would help us out in terms of our messaging as well, if it's just more cohesive in that manner.
I agree. I actually saw it as the other side of the UPlan piece, if possible, so that it wasn't like this whole brand new piece. If that was okay, and I had planned to talk to Rachel and everyone, and of course we need to, connect with the parent leaders of the immigration policy committee. But if there was a way that we could develop something that addresses this piece, that goes together, that it's definitely a continuum, not something brand new. So thank you, though, Jacob, for documenting that. Anything else?
I love that.
Yeah.
Good. I love that.
Awesome. Is this okay with everyone? Is there anyone who says, no, we don't want to do any of this? Okay, great. Well, I want to say what we're going to do is we'll be following up, sharing this information back with all of you, and inviting all of the other partners who weren't able to make the call. And I apologize for the snafu where I thought the Zoom had went yesterday. The information it didn't, so that might explain why some people didn't get the right information. But I'm really grateful for all of you who were able to figure it out and join us today. And we did not set a next meeting, and possibly what we'll do when we share this information is send possible dates that we could meet around these strategies. Is that okay with everyone? Mm-hmm. All right, great. Well, thank you again for all of your time. Thanks, Melvette, for hosting us in Zoom, and everyone have a great afternoon.
Thank you.
All right, bye-bye.
Thank you.